I started building green buildings 14 years ago. I was all alone, but very quickly came to realize that green buildings alone, saving the environment, was not necessarily all that was necessary. In fact, I quickly concluded that building green buildings was not the final frontier for us real estate developers. And that is because we need to go beyond green. We need to make systemic and structural changes in how people think, in their level of happiness, and what they're able to contribute, and what they're able to overcome. And is it possible that we could create situations where people could begin to think in a way that is spontaneously right, that is spontaneously in accord with natural law? And my work expanded beyond green buildings into exploring the world of architecture and also in the use of meditation to improve business and educational outcomes. And I quickly realized that real estate became a very critical component in how we could change our society. And I began to look into different forms of architecture, the traditions of architecture. And I had the great honor of working with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi from even 37 years ago. Maharishi was the founder of the Transcendental Meditation program. And Maharishi had restored about 20 years ago the ancient science of Vastu. Maybe some of you have heard of it, also known as Vedic Architecture. Vastu, or Vedic architecture, had become, well, as we say in America, very creative. We had adapted it to the American economic system and had reduced it down to some water and some angles and some ideas that were just really could be commercially applied. But Maharishi restored it to its original concept, which is that Vedic architecture is architecture in accord with natural law. What is natural law? Natural law are those impulses of nature that uphold life. Now, is it possible that we could build structures that capture the totality of natural law so that our thinking and aspirations are supported by natural law? In other words, could our businesses be more successful if we took the most expensive component of operating a business, which is human capital, and put them in environments that they could thrive? And that's what excited me. That was the next generation of green buildings. Now, Vedic architecture are basically things you've heard about before. They have to deal with orientation of buildings east, that way, towards the rising sun. It has to do also with placement on the land, the position of water bodies, and most of all, proportions. Height, width, length, the basic components of architecture. It turns out that the universe has an architecture. And if we build according to that architecture, then we can capture the totality of nature, because nature has a structure. And we are part of that structure, that universe, and everything must apply to that same higher values that nature has presented itself. So in our home buildings, that architecture also has to be harnessed and represented. And if so, then nature begins to work for you. And then you really create high-performance buildings and people. An architect I worked with who designed my own Vedic architecture home, named Bobby McAlpine from Montgomery, Alabama, I thought really elegantly described the value of getting the architecture right. He said, home is a powerful means of healing. Designed correctly, the home is a very still and quiet place. When the math is gorgeous and perfect, it is at rest, and your potential to come to rest will follow. You are in an architecture that is strong and receiving of you, your home safe and free. The integrity of beautiful math is an elixir of spirit and place. Through gorgeous math, good architecture creates a benevolent presence that embraces and comforts you, or energizes and exhilarates. How many have ever been in a building like that? How many have ever been in a building that exhilarates you, that lifts you? Your whole spirit is lifted. Like what architecture is really about. Or is it just shelter? How many of you have ever been in a building, well, that is so terrible that you don't realize how terrible it is until you go out? It's like the contrast. You need the contrast to realize that buildings have an effect. When you go into a building that is terrible, you realize that when you step out, you feel as if this weight has lifted off your chest. Human beings respond to space. When the space is perfect, then it lifts our spirits and lifts our creative potential. And nature begins to work for us. Now, why is it important that we want to teach our children in buildings that lift the spirit? Or come to work where we spend 10, 12 hours a day if we're lucky, only that. Because, as I mentioned before, human capital is the most expensive cost of operating a business. It turns out that rent is only 8% of the cost of operating a business. Yet, in my world, getting the best deal is the most important description of getting the best building. Now, in Washington, D.C., it's not necessarily in New York, but in Washington, D.C., if you say the average rent is $40 a foot, the cost of human capital is approximately $400 a foot. That's approximately 300 square feet per person times the salary times 0.7, which is the cost of insurance, which is the cost of turnover, which is job losses and bringing in new people. It's the cost of sickness days, vacation days, everything that really costs to operate a business. You multiply the salary by 1.70. So if you take that $400 a foot of human capital that you're spending every year, can you create an environment that's an investment into that human capital as measured in price per square foot? And if the building made a contribution to that to enhance the output of those people by 5%, it's not even possible it could be just that little. That would be the equivalent of $20 found money, which is half the cost of the rent. So as we begin to look at different architectural systems, such as Vedic architecture, we really can begin to really go where we're trying to accomplish in green buildings by really enhancing people's lives. Now we're talking about making businesses more creative. And this idea caught the attention of Harvard, believe it or not. And this building, I didn't bring any slides, but you can just go to our website, towercompanies.com. And our headquarters, called 2000 Tower Oaks Boulevard, became a study of a case study at Harvard. And the joint press release stated this: this case study challenged students to consider the fact that human capital costs were higher than energy costs, and perhaps it made more business sense to focus on improving the efficiency and productivity of the employees by employing ideas like Vedic architecture. Harvard. Now, when I asked the students in Harvard, when I got a chance to speak to them, have they ever experienced buildings that elevated them, and have they ever experienced buildings that crushed them? And very few people raised their hands about buildings that elevated them. But when I asked a negative experience, they all pointed down, the classroom in which they were working in. So much potential has been lost because of that. I also wanted to share a few experiences of people that are working in this building, which is also LEED Platinum, that combines Vedic architecture. Quote, I sense some form of subtle intelligence going on with the staff while they are working. They are thinking and producing and seem to be in sync without actually talking about it. I feel happier, and it's hard to find the words, but I have a lighter feeling. Instead of feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders, I feel more optimistic. The exposure to the sun is beneficial, but it's more than that. It's the absence of chemicals that can be irritating to our systems. It's the greenery, it's the sunlight, it's the cleaner air, but it feels like it's more than that. I feel like I have a connection to everyone here. If it's the Vedic architecture, then thank goodness for Vedic architecture. Whatever it is, or whatever combination of things it is, I feel better. I love coming to work here. I don't feel closed off from the outside world. My creative side has never been so activated. I always feel like I need to come back here to get centered. There is an energized sense of calm confidence that we can manage everyday's business activities no matter what challenges we encounter. And as developers, we are an important part of the world's future. If I had more time, I would go into more about Vedic architecture. But certainly we know that buildings facing east. Why east? The sun rises to the east. All life is dependent on the sun. And if you look at Bob's drawings, what he showed is that the buildings, as it grew towards the east. Because in all traditions, not just in our Native American traditions, the sun is the giver of life. And we know that sun has a very unique, morning sun has a very unique energy that's very different than the evening sun. The morning sun, we wake up with ambition and ready to go to work. It has a different energy, a different quality, and has a different color. In the evening, well, most people go to a bar. So that's the first-hand experience of what it's like. Also, what's fascinating is that facing buildings east, you may say, well, that doesn't sound that scientific. How could it be? But it turns out that if you face a building east, you need less artificial light. And mechanical engineers will tell you that if you want to make a more energy-efficient building, never face the building due east, because then the building has more exposure to the western sunlight, which will heat up the building. They're correct, but what they don't understand is that heat has light, and light is free. And in sunlight, we thrive. So even in the ancient wisdom, it understood the values that we're beginning to realize today. So we use 6.64 watts per square foot in our office space because half the light is free. And I learned that the hard way by working with mechanical engineers who over-designed some of the first buildings we did facing east, over-designed the lighting because they really had no idea of the environments that they were creating. I also realized that a critical component of life certainly is our buildings. We spend 90% of our time indoors. But is there a way to really affect more intimately, more deeply, human beings? And why is human capital so critical? Why is it that we need to protect people? Well, they represent our companies. They are the basis of growing a company. And yet we expect a lot from our employees. We pay them salaries. We expect them to work hard. We make them sick. Then we pay the increase in insurance. And then they get sicker. And then we pay the increases again, at the same time expecting them to be as productive and alert and energized as the day we hired them. Does everyone know what the cost of health care is in the United States? It's $251 million an hour. That's 2.2 trillion divided by 365 divided by 24. You can do the math later. That's how much it costs to defend the health of our people. And businesses can play a very unique role in maintaining the costs and reducing the cost, and that is through prevention. If we use prevention as a health care, then thank God we won't know what we're preventing. But in our country, it's all about output. It's all about keeping up. And yet we do not invest in our people, invest in their brilliance, keeping the brilliance, giving them access to their brilliance every day. We just expect them to somehow figure it out. And businesses need to provide the tools. Now, I chose meditation because the mind is so critical in all decision making. It's everything about a person. How do I access that mind, that quality that keeps people young? It's not just through exercise. It's not just through diet. It's not just philosophy. It's not an attitude. It's not just reading books. You have to live that. Otherwise, you're just seeking and searching forever. Now, I chose Transcendental Meditation because Transcendental Meditation is not a meditation technique that is involving concentration. Therefore, it is a technique for everyone. It's not for certain people who can try to focus the mind. It's not for people who want to disengage from life. I had to find a technique that had enormous scientific research, but it was natural, effortless technique. That it wasn't dependent, that once you learned properly, you weren't dependent on other people to allow you to meditate, because I wanted it to become a self-sufficient technique for people to grow themselves. And because it was natural technique, it wasn't something that you had to practice to get perfect at. It's an effortless, natural technique, like if you wanted to dive into a swimming pool, all you have to do is take the correct angle. Everything else is absolutely natural at that point. And you learn in about 4 days, an hour each time. And we offered it as our part of our healthcare in our business. The results have been phenomenal. I have been working with, also with David Lynch, the famous movie director, and we're providing scholarships for over 150,000 students, members of our prisons, homeless, American Indians, and children in our public and private schools, with enormous results, because change happens within. And if you give someone access, that's what transcendental means, going beyond the surface level of thought and action, accessing our true selves, which has a quality of eternity, of clarity, of balance. You're more thoughtful, you're more reflective, you have a thirst for knowledge. And in that quest and in that excitement for life that begins to unfold, then the students, then the homeless, then people in our business begin to change their own lives. So I would love to continue to talk more about this, but I think you've realized that we have to continue to look at all aspects of how to improve society if we're going to accomplish. And the best, the most exciting ways are creating that change within. If we can change the person within, then they more automatically, naturally begin to act in accord with natural law. So it's a great honor to speak to all of you and to share together our common goals. And I wish that we all experience great, great success, that we measure in multiple ways of a growing, healthy, prosperous world. Thank you very much.